we also build up what we believe is a really important group of people that have long-term relationships with the winners, and you can pass that on in a way that we perhaps couldn't do before. The winners will pass it on amongst their own networks, and we can pass it on a broader network.
Princess Anne just discovered the shocking truth Philip hid for 70 years. A secret family, hidden children, a woman the palace erased from history. When the DNA results came back, Anne collapsed. The royal family is in absolute chaos. What they found will destroy everything you thought you knew about Prince Philip. The Queen knew. Charles knew. Somehow they all knew.
No, but it makes existence a lot better, doesn't it? I mean, it makes it worthwhile. And it makes it a positive experience rather than just having to, struggle through it. I mean, I think that street furniture, for instance, I mean, why should attractive things only be in the home? Why can't they be outside where you see them?
And they kept it hidden. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, was known to the world as Queen Elizabeth's devoted husband, a man who sacrificed his own naval career to support the woman who would become Britain's longest reigning monarch. Throughout their marriage, he maintained a careful distance from the spotlight, yet his presence was always felt. Sharp-witted, occasionally controversial, and fiercely independent, Philip carved out a role that had no real precedent in modern British history. But behind the formal portraits and carefully choreographed public appearances, there existed a more complicated story, one that involves a woman whose name rarely appears in official histories, yet whose connection to Prince Philip has sparked decades of speculation and quiet gossip. Her name was Helen Corday, and the nature of their relationship remains one of the most intriguing mysteries surrounding the Duke of Edinburgh's private life. Helen was not a member of the aristocracy, though she moved comfortably within those circles. She was an entertainer, a woman who made her living on stage and in the relatively new world of television and radio. Born in France to Greek parents, she possessed a natural charm and elegance that made her a sought-after presence in post-war British society. She spoke multiple languages fluently, carried herself with confidence, and had an easy way with people that opened doors in even the most exclusive settings. What made her friendship with Prince Philip noteworthy was not simply that it existed, but that it endured. While many of Philip's wartime friendships faded as he took on royal duties, his connection with Helen remained constant. They were seen together at social gatherings, she was welcomed into circles close to the royal family, and by all accounts, they maintained regular contact throughout his marriage to the Queen. In an environment where appearances were everything and discretion was paramount, this was unusual. The whispers began in earnest when Helen gave birth to 2 children in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Both children were born out of wedlock, a fact that carried significant social stigma at the time, particularly in Britain's upper classes. What raised eyebrows further was that Prince Philip became godfather to both children. He provided financial support, took an active interest in their well-being, and maintained a presence in their lives, even as his own royal responsibilities grew more demanding. According to various accounts that have emerged over the years, Philip's support was not merely symbolic. He helped ensure the children received good educations and remained involved in their lives in ways that went beyond what might be expected of a casual family friend. This level of involvement, combined with his close relationship with their mother, naturally led to questions. In the gossip columns and society circles of the time, speculation was rife. Was this simply an act of kindness between old friends? Or was there something more to the story? Helen herself never publicly identified the father of her children. She later married a man who gave them his surname, but she took that secret to her grave. Prince Philip, for his part, never addressed the rumors directly. The palace maintained its traditional silence on matters deemed private, and both Philip and Helen seemed content to let the speculation swirl without confirmation or denial. What makes this story particularly compelling is not just the unanswered questions about paternity, but what it reveals about Prince Philip as a person. Here was a man bound by the strictest protocols of royal life, someone whose every public move was scrutinized, and whose marriage was considered a cornerstone of the modern monarchy. Yet he maintained a relationship that invited scandal, supported children whose parentage was unclear, and refused to abandon a friendship that many in his position would have quietly ended to avoid controversy. Some historians and biographers have suggested that the friendship was entirely innocent, pointing to Philip's known generosity toward old friends and his tendency to maintain loyalties forged in his younger years. Others have noted that in aristocratic circles of that era, such arrangements were not entirely uncommon, and that what might seem scandalous by today's standards operated under different social rules at the time. But before we can truly understand the nature of Philip and Helen's relationship, we need to look back at how it began. Who exactly was this woman who commanded such loyalty from a future prince consort? How did a French-born entertainer and a Greek prince without a country come to form a bond that would last a lifetime? And what was it about their shared backgrounds that created such a deep and enduring connection? The answers lie not in the glittering ballrooms of Buckingham Palace, but in the displaced and uncertain world of pre-war Europe. A world where royal titles meant little without kingdoms to back them, where political upheaval sent families scattering across borders, and where those who had lost everything often found solace in others who understood what it meant to live between worlds. Both Philip and Helen carried the marks of displacement. Neither grew up with the stability and security that their backgrounds might have suggested. Both navigated a Europe that was rapidly changing, where the old orders were crumbling and new uncertainties emerged with each passing year. In that environment, connections forged between kindred spirits often ran deeper than conventional relationships, bound by shared experiences of loss, adaptation, and survival. This was not a friendship born in the comfortable surroundings of established society. It emerged from something more fundamental, a recognition between two people who understood what it meant to be rootless, to carry identities that didn't quite fit anywhere, and to build lives from fragments of different worlds. That understanding, formed in their earliest years, would become the foundation for a relationship that defied easy categorization and resisted the scrutiny of decades. The question of whether Prince Philip fathered Helen Corded's children may never be definitively answered, but perhaps the more interesting question is what their enduring friendship tells us about the man behind the royal title, and about a woman whose story has been largely written out of official histories, despite her clear importance in his life. They did not meet by chance. In the interconnected world of pre-war Europe, certain circles overlapped in ways that made encounters between displaced royals and artistic families almost inevitable. This was a time when borders meant less than they would later come to mean, when those who had lost their places in the old order formed their own networks of survival and mutual support. In cafes in Paris, at seaside resorts along the French coast, in the drawing rooms of relatives who still had homes to offer, people like Philip and Helen found themselves crossing paths again and again. Britain and the continent during this period were alive with these tightly woven social circles. Aristocrats who had fled revolutions, royals without thrones, artists seeking patronage, and families trying to maintain some semblance of their former lives, all moved within the same spaces. A young naval cadet with a disputed claim to a Greek throne and a rising entertainer from a Greek family living in France would naturally find themselves in the same rooms, at the same gatherings, sharing the same experiences of living between worlds. Both carried the weight of displacement, though it manifested differently in their lives. For Philip, it was written into his very identity. He was born a prince, yet that title came attached to a kingdom that had violently rejected his family before he could even walk. His earliest years were marked not by the stability of palace life, but by the constant movement of exile, by suitcases packed and unpacked, by bedrooms in borrowed houses, by the peculiar loneliness of being passed between relatives who meant well but could not replace parents. Helen's displacement was perhaps less dramatic, but no less real. Born in France to Greek parents, she grew up navigating multiple identities in a Europe that was rapidly reshaping itself. The cultural heritage of her parents, the French society around her, and the gathering storm of political instability all shaped her early years. Like Philip, she learned early to adapt, to read rooms, to understand that survival sometimes meant reinvention. This shared experience of rootlessness created a particular kind of bond. Both understood what it meant to not quite belong anywhere, to carry names and histories that connected them to places they could not claim as home. In each other, they may have found something rare, someone who did not need explanations, who understood instinctively what it felt like to live with that particular form of uncertainty. But to truly understand how Philip came to be in this position, we must go back further, to the turbulent history that shaped his family and ultimately sent them into exile. His story does not begin with privilege and security, but with the violent political convulsions that tore through Greece in the early 20th century, leaving the monarchy in tatters and Philip's family scrambling for safety. Philip's lineage traced back to the House of Glucksburg, a branch of Danish royalty that had surprisingly deep roots across Europe. His great-grandfather, King Christian IX of Denmark, had earned the nickname Father-in-law of Europe through the strategic marriages of his children into royal houses across the continent. One of these children, Prince William of Denmark, was selected in 1863 to become King George I of Greece, establishing a new dynasty in what was still a relatively young modern nation-state. King George I, Philip's grandfather, ruled Greece for 50 years during a period of significant expansion and modernization. Under his leadership, Greece grew substantially in both territory and national confidence. The Balkan Wars of the early 20th century brought particular success, as Greece fought alongside its neighbors to push back the declining Ottoman Empire. The victories were celebrated across the nation. Thessaloniki, Epirus, and much of Macedonia came under Greek control, fulfilling long-held dreams of territorial expansion. But just as Greece seemed poised to consolidate these gains, tragedy struck with shocking suddenness. In March 1913, King George was assassinated while walking through the streets of newly liberated Thessaloniki. The act sent shockwaves through the Greek establishment and brought his son Constantine to the throne, at a moment when Europe itself was about to descend into chaos. Constantine I, Philip's uncle, would become one of the most controversial figures in modern Greek history. He was a decorated military officer with genuine strategic ability, respected by many for his leadership during the Balkan Wars. But he was also married to Princess Sophia of Prussia, a connection that tied the Greek royal family closely to the German Empire. This relationship, which had seemed unremarkable in peacetime, became disastrous as the First World War engulfed Europe. When war broke out, Greece found itself torn between conflicting loyalties. Constantine's German connections clashed directly with the views of his prime minister, Eleftherios Venizelos, who strongly favored the Allied cause. What began as a policy disagreement escalated into what became known as the National Schism, a deep political and social divide that split Greek society down the middle. Families were torn apart, political violence erupted, and the question of which side Greece should support in the war became entangled with larger questions about the country's future direction. Under heavy pressure from the Allied powers, who needed Greece as a strategic partner, Constantine was forced to abdicate in 1917. The throne passed to his son Alexander, Philip's cousin, who was seen as more acceptable to the Allies. But fate intervened again, in the most unexpected way. Just 3 years into his reign, Alexander died from an infection following a monkey bite. The bizarre circumstances of his death left the succession in question, and in 1920, Constantine was restored to the throne. During this tumultuous period, Constantine's younger brother, Prince Andrew, Philip's father, pursued his career in the military. After the war, Greece saw an opportunity to capitalize on the defeat of the Ottoman Empire by expanding its territory into Asia Minor. In 1919, Greek troops, including forces under Andrew's command, landed in Smyrna and launched an ambitious campaign into Turkish territory. The goal was to reclaim lands that Greek nationalists considered historically and culturally Greek, to build a greater Greece that would unite Greek populations across the eastern Mediterranean. For a time, the campaign seemed to be succeeding. Greek forces pushed inland, and dreams of a restored Byzantine glory captured the popular imagination. But the tide turned with devastating speed. Turkish nationalists, led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, mounted a fierce and effective resistance. The Greek army, overextended and facing increasingly organized opposition, found itself in retreat. In 1922, Smyrna was lost in a catastrophe that claimed tens of thousands of lives. The city burned, civilians were massacred, and the Greek dream of expansion in Asia Minor ended not in glory but in ashes and trauma. Back in Athens, the disaster demanded accountability. Public anger focused on the monarchy and military leadership. Constantine was forced to abdicate once again, this time permanently. A military tribunal was convened to prosecute those deemed responsible for the catastrophic failure. Among those arrested was Prince Andrew. The charges against him were serious, carrying the potential for execution. His position as a royal offered little protection in a country that had turned decisively against the monarchy. It was only through intervention from abroad, particularly from King George V of Britain, that Andrew's life was spared. Instead of execution, he was sentenced to exile. In the winter of 1922, the royal family fled Greece aboard a British warship. Prince Andrew, his wife Princess Alice of Battenberg, and their infant son Philip, just 18 months old, were evacuated to an uncertain future. The baby was reportedly carried aboard ship in a makeshift cart fashioned from an orange crate, a detail that would later be recounted as symbolic of just how far and how fast the family had fallen. Philip had been born a prince of Greece and Denmark, titles that carried weight and meaning. But Greece no longer wanted its royals, and those titles now represented not privilege but displacement. The boy who would one day stand beside a queen and become one of the most recognizable figures in the world began his life as a stateless exile, a child without a country, part of a family that had lost everything in the space of a few brutal years. This was the inheritance Philip carried, a history not of secure privilege but of political violence, military disaster, and forced exile. It shaped everything that came after. In late December 1922, a British naval vessel docked quietly along the French coast. Among the passengers was a family stripped of their homeland, their security, and any clear sense of what the future might hold. Prince Andrew and Princess Alice disembarked with their 5 children, the youngest of whom was Philip, still too young to understand that his life had just been fundamentally altered. The escape from Greece had been urgent, arranged at the highest levels of British royalty. King George V, Philip's great-uncle, had personally intervened to ensure their safe passage aboard HMS Calypso, preventing what could have been a far darker outcome for the exiled prince. The family settled in St. Cloud, a quiet suburb on the western edge of Paris. The house they occupied was not their own, but had been generously loaned to them by Princess Marie Bonaparte, a wealthy psychoanalyst who was also Philip's aunt by marriage. Marie was an unusual figure in her own right, a woman of independent means and intellectual pursuits who had studied under Sigmund Freud and would later help him escape Nazi-occupied Austria. Her willingness to provide refuge for the displaced Greek royals offered them a temporary haven, but it was hardly the foundation for a stable new life. Though surrounded by extended family and living in comfortable enough circumstances, the household existed on fragile ground. Royal titles meant very little when divorced from actual kingdoms and political power. Money was tight, and Prince Andrew found himself without purpose or occupation. He had been a military officer, a prince with responsibilities and a defined role. Now he was simply a man living on the charity of relatives, his reputation damaged by the military disaster in Asia Minor, his future prospects uncertain at best. Princess Alice faced her own battles, ones that were becoming increasingly difficult to hide. Deeply religious and emotionally sensitive by nature, she began showing signs of severe mental disturbance. She experienced delusions and suffered breakdowns that alarmed those around her. Her grip on reality appeared to be loosening, and the stress of exile combined with her underlying psychological vulnerabilities created a crisis that the family could not manage on their own. By 1930, Alice's condition had deteriorated to the point where professional intervention became necessary. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia and committed to a sanatorium in Switzerland. The treatment she received there included methods that were considered progressive at the time, but would later be viewed as controversial, including sessions with Freud himself. She would remain institutionalized for several years, removed from her children during a period when they needed parental stability most. With Alice confined to a mental institution and Andrew increasingly detached, the family structure simply collapsed. Andrew, unable to cope with his circumstances and perhaps unwilling to confront the depths of the crisis, retreated into a life of gambling and aimless wandering. He spent time in Monte Carlo and the south of France, living in modest hotels, playing cards, and maintaining only sporadic contact with his children. He had effectively abandoned his parental responsibilities, leaving his children to be raised by whoever was willing to take them in. Philip's 4 older sisters, Margarita, Theodora, Cecily, and Sophie, found their own paths out of this unstable situation through marriage. All four married into German aristocratic families during the 1930s, alliances that reflected both the social networks available to displaced royalty and the limited options available to young women in their position. These marriages took them away from France and scattered them across Germany, leaving Philip increasingly isolated. He became, in effect, a child of shifting addresses and temporary guardians, too young to join his sisters in their new households, too disruptive to his parents' deteriorating lives. Philip was moved between relatives in Britain and Germany. He adapted to new surroundings with the resilience that comes from necessity, learning early that attachment to places or expectations of stability were luxuries he could not afford. This itinerant childhood taught him self-reliance and a certain emotional toughness, but it also left scars that would shape his personality for the rest of his life. In the late 1920s, Philip arrived in Britain to live under the guardianship of his maternal uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten. This arrangement would prove transformative. Mountbatten was a powerful and ambitious figure with strong connections to the British royal family and the naval establishment. He saw potential in his nephew and took an active role in shaping the boy's future, particularly regarding education and career. Philip's formal British education began at Cheam School in Surrey, one of London's oldest private preparatory institutions. But in 1933, Mountbatten made a decision that raised eyebrows among some relatives. He sent Philip to Salem School in Germany, a progressive boarding institution founded and run by Kurt Hahn. Hahn was an educational reformer who believed in building character through physical challenge, community service, and exposure to the outdoors. His methods were unconventional but had attracted attention across Europe. However, the political situation in Germany was rapidly deteriorating. With the rise of National Socialism, Hahn, who was Jewish, found his position increasingly untenable. He was briefly imprisoned by the Nazi regime before international pressure secured his release. Recognizing that Germany was no longer safe, Hahn fled to Britain, and Philip followed him. This experience gave Philip a first-hand glimpse of the gathering darkness in Europe, even as a young teenager. Hahn established a new school in Scotland called Gordonstown, and Philip enrolled there in 1934. The institution was deliberately austere and demanding, designed to build resilience and character through discipline, physical endurance, and service to others. Students took cold showers, went on long runs regardless of weather, and were expected to develop independence and self-reliance. For Philip, who had already learned to adapt to difficult circumstances, Gordonstown's harsh regime was challenging but not entirely foreign. He thrived there in many ways, developing the physical toughness and no-nonsense attitude that would characterize him throughout his life. Encouraged by Mountbatten and prepared by his demanding schooling, Philip entered the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth in 1939. The timing was significant. Europe was on the brink of war, and the naval training that might have been a peacetime career preparation became instead a fast track to active combat duty. Philip distinguished himself quickly at Dartmouth, excelling in both academic studies and physical training. He graduated at the top of his class in naval theory, demonstrating the intellectual capability that often went unrecognized beneath his gruff exterior. When the Second World War broke out, Philip's training was accelerated out of military necessity. At just 18 years old, he began active service, eventually seeing combat in both the Mediterranean and Pacific theaters. He served aboard HMS Valiant during the Battle of Cape Matapan, one of the Royal Navy's significant victories in the Mediterranean. Later, he was assigned to HMS Wallace, where his performance under pressure earned him recognition and rapid promotion. By 1942, he had risen to the rank of First Lieutenant, becoming one of the youngest officers to achieve that position in the Royal Navy. His wartime service gave him not only professional distinction but also a sense of purpose and belonging that had been largely absent from his chaotic childhood. Meanwhile, across the Channel and then across the sea to Britain, Helen was navigating her own wartime journey. As German forces occupied France, she made the decision to flee to London. The choice was both practical and dangerous, as crossing occupied territory required resources, connections, and considerable luck. But Helen possessed qualities that served her well in uncertain times. Her cosmopolitan background, her fluency in both French and English, and her natural charm opened doors even in wartime Britain. Once in London, She quickly established herself in broadcasting. The BBC's French service was actively recruiting native speakers who could communicate effectively with audiences in occupied France, and Helen's voice became one of those beamed across the channel. Her warm and engaging delivery style made her programs popular, and she became something of a symbol of Allied resilience for French listeners. Broadcasting offered both a livelihood and a sense of contributing to the war effort, and Helen's profile in London society rose accordingly. It was during this period that she and Philip reconnected. Both were now in London, both had been shaped by displacement and war, and both moved within overlapping social circles. Their childhood friendship, forged in the uncertain years before the war, now matured into something deeper and more complex. They were frequently seen together at social functions and gatherings. Some accounts suggest that Helen occasionally acted as a hostess at events Philip attended, particularly before his relationship with Princess Elizabeth became public. For Philip, who had few people in his life who understood his complicated background, Helen represented a rare connection to his past, and to someone who shared similar experiences of living between cultures and identities. Their bond during these years was notable precisely because it seemed so natural and unforced in an environment where most of Philip's relationships were increasingly defined by protocol and royal expectations. With Helen, he could relax and be himself in ways that were becoming increasingly difficult as his future path began to take shape. The summer of 1939 brought an encounter that would change the course of British royal history. During a visit to the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth, King George VI arrived with his family, including his two daughters, Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret. Philip, then a cadet at the college, was assigned to escort the young princesses during their tour of the facilities. Elizabeth was just 13 years old at the time, but by multiple accounts, she was immediately taken with the confident and strikingly handsome naval cadet who showed them around. Philip was 18, tall, blonde, and possessed of an easy athleticism that made him stand out among his peers. More than his physical appearance, he had a directness and lack of pretension that must have been refreshing to a young princess whose life was already heavily constrained by protocol. Whether Philip was similarly impressed at the time remains unclear, but he was courteous and attentive, and the visit left a strong impression on Elizabeth. In the months and years that followed, as war consumed Europe and Philip went off to active service, the two began exchanging letters. What started as occasional correspondence gradually developed into something more serious. Elizabeth, despite her youth, seemed certain of her feelings, and those close to the royal family noticed her growing attachment to the young naval officer. Philip, for his part, was reportedly more cautious, aware of the complications that any relationship with the heir to the British throne would inevitably bring. By 1946, with the war concluded and Philip having distinguished himself in naval service, he made the decision to ask King George VI for Elizabeth's hand in marriage. The request put the king in a delicate position. Philip had much to recommend him in terms of character and royal lineage, but he also came with complications. He was technically still a Greek prince, though Greece itself remained politically unstable and had only recently restored its monarchy after the war. His German connections through his sisters, all of whom had married into German aristocratic families with ties to the Nazi regime, were politically problematic in post-war Britain, and his lack of financial resources or independent standing made some members of the establishment uncomfortable. The king asked Philip to wait, suggesting that Elizabeth was still young and that time would clarify whether their feelings were lasting. But he did not reject the suit outright, and Philip remained a frequent presence in royal circles. During this period of waiting and uncertainty, his friendship with Helen Corday continued without interruption. They remained close, seeing each other regularly, and their easy rapport was noted by others in their social circle. Then came the development that would fuel decades of speculation and gossip. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Helen Corday gave birth to two children, both born outside of marriage. In an era when unmarried motherhood carried significant social stigma, particularly in the upper middle class and aristocratic circles where Helen moved, this was a potentially devastating situation. A woman in her position could expect to be ostracized, to lose social standing, and to face serious difficulties in providing for her children. But something unexpected happened. Rather than distancing himself from Helen during this scandal, Prince Philip stepped forward to offer support. He became godfather to both children. a role that was far from merely ceremonial. According to various accounts that emerged over the years, Philip provided financial assistance to help with their upbringing and education. He took an active interest in their welfare, maintained contact with them as they grew, and treated them with a level of care and concern that went well beyond what might be expected from a casual family friend. This support continued even after Philip married Princess Elizabeth in November 1947, becoming Duke of Edinburgh and taking his place as consort to the future Queen. Even as his public responsibilities grew and his life became increasingly scrutinized, he did not abandon his commitment to Helen's children. The arrangement was unusual enough to attract attention, discreet enough to avoid open scandal, but public enough that it could not be entirely hidden. The whispers began almost immediately. In the gossip columns of the time and in the drawing rooms of London society, questions were asked. Why would Prince Philip involve himself so deeply in the lives of these children? What was the true nature of his relationship with their mother? And, most pointedly, could he be the biological father? Helen herself never provided answers. She later married a man named Marcel Boisseau, who gave his surname to her children, but she steadfastly refused to reveal their biological father's identity. When pressed by journalists or curious acquaintances, she maintained her silence. This discretion was absolute and lasted her entire life. She took whatever secrets she held to her grave when she died in 1996. Prince Philip, true to his character, never addressed the rumors publicly. The palace, following its long-established policy on matters deemed private, issued no statements and offered no clarifications. Both Philip and Helen seemed content, or perhaps simply resigned, to let speculation continue without feeding it with denials or confirmations. Over the decades, various journalists and biographers attempted to investigate the question. Some concluded that the relationship was entirely innocent, arguing that Philip's support could be explained by simple friendship and his known loyalty to those he cared about. They pointed to his tendency to maintain connections from his earlier life, even when doing so was inconvenient or invited misunderstanding. Philip had relatively few people who had known him before he became a royal consort, and Helen represented one of those rare connections to his pre-palace life. Others noted that in aristocratic circles of that era, particularly among displaced European nobility, social arrangements often existed that defied conventional moral categories. Support for children born outside of marriage, godparenthood that carried real responsibilities, and friendships that blurred boundaries were not unheard of in these circles. What might appear scandalous by middle-class standards operated under different social rules among those who moved in Philip and Helen's world. Some investigators claim to have found circumstantial evidence suggesting a romantic relationship between Philip and Helen during the crucial period in the 1940s. They pointed to the timing of the children's births, to Philip's unusually strong commitment to their welfare, and to the intensity of his friendship with their mother. But circumstantial evidence is not proof, and no documentary evidence has ever emerged that definitively establishes paternity. The children themselves, as they grew to adulthood, maintained the same discretion their mother had practiced. They acknowledged Prince Philip's role in their lives, spoke warmly of his support and guidance, but did not publicly speculate about whether that support stemmed from friendship or from biology. This restraint, whether chosen or required, meant that the question remained perpetually open. What makes this story more than mere gossip is what it reveals about the complicated nature of Prince Philip's life and loyalties. Here was a man who had experienced profound displacement and loss in his childhood, who understood what it meant to be without family support or secure identity. When faced with a situation involving children who might be growing up with similar uncertainties, he chose to provide support regardless of what others might think or say. This choice carried real risks. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, as he was courting and then marrying Princess Elizabeth, any whiff of scandal could have derailed his prospects entirely. The establishment had significant reservations about him already. A confirmed relationship with another woman, particularly one resulting in children born out of wedlock, would almost certainly have ended any possibility of marriage to the heir to the throne. Yet Philip maintained his support for Helen and her children even during this most delicate period. After his marriage, the risks only increased. As Duke of Edinburgh, and then as consort to the Queen, his behaviour reflected on the monarchy itself. Any scandal touching him would damage the institution he had sworn to serve. The Queen's position required absolute discretion from those around her, and Philip's continued involvement with Helen's family invited exactly the kind of speculation that the palace normally went to extraordinary lengths to avoid. Yet the friendship endured through all of it, through the coronation in 1953, through the births of Philip and Elizabeth's own children, through decades of royal duties and public service. Philip maintained his connection to Helen. They remained in contact. He continued to take an interest in her children's lives, and neither seemed willing to end a relationship that clearly meant something significant to both of them. For over 70 years, from their possible first meeting as children in France through Philip's death in 2021, this bond persisted. It survived war, royal marriage, public scrutiny, and the weight of historical significance. Whatever its true nature, whether romantic, paternal, or simply an unusually deep friendship, it represented something important in Philip's life, that he refused to surrender, even when doing so might have been easier or safer. The truth about Prince Philip and Helen Corday may never be fully known. The principles are all now gone, and if documents exist that could settle the question definitively, they remain hidden in private archives or were destroyed long ago. We are left with fragments, with accounts from those who observed them from the outside, with circumstantial evidence that points in multiple directions, and with the undeniable fact of a relationship that endured across a lifetime. Perhaps the unanswered questions are themselves part of the story's significance. In an age of constant revelation and enforced transparency, here is a mystery that has resisted resolution. Two people who valued discretion kept their secrets, and in doing so preserved something private in lives that were otherwise lived under relentless public observation. Whether that privacy protected a scandal or simply shielded a deep friendship from misinterpretation, it represents a kind of dignity that has become increasingly rare. What remains clear is that behind the formal photographs and the carefully managed public image of Prince Philip, there existed a more complex person with loyalties and connections that defied easy explanation. His relationship with Helen Corday, whatever its exact nature, stands as one of the most intriguing personal stories in modern royal history, a reminder that even the most scrutinized lives contain depths that remain mysterious.